Okay, so today is our final class period in what has been an extraordinary year, I think, for everybody. Hopefully, when you all return in the fall, we'll be back to something that resembles normal and more people in front of me rather than online. So, but I want to thank you all for putting up with all of the difficulties that we've had this semester in terms of, having to watch videos because, people tested positive or, just sort of the strange nature of the current world we're living in. So hopefully as more people get vaccinated, we'll achieve herd immunity and we'll be back to something that resembles a normal semester in the fall. So we were talking about sales. This is, of course, one of my favorite topics since I am one of the coaches for the professional sales team here at UCO. And again, my shameless plug for our program, we have one of the only programs in the nation that actually has a full sales program, both a major, a minor, and we're developing an MBA in Salesforce management, professional selling and Salesforce management. So we are ahead of the rest of the country as more and more schools are starting to develop sales programs and recognizing that the value that this program will bring to their students in terms of the employability. One of the things that's become enormously important is the ability to quantify student success after graduation. And the sales program is one of those that we can actually quantify with really good data, the number of people that we get jobs and the number of students that achieve a high level of success post-graduation and being able to actually get a job in field. So I think it's well worth considering. And I think that it's one of those things that even if you don't want to get a sales major, certainly getting the minor is beneficial because most people's first jobs are going to be selling. Even if you're going into finance, for example, that's largely a sales role. My brother is a vice president with Goldman Sachs. I think I've told you all this before. He's a tax attorney. And a big portion of his job is engaging in what they call marketing meetings with prospective clients. He never thought he would be a salesperson. He thought he was going to do taxes, and that was going to be the extent of his career. And about 65 to 70% of his job is actually going out, meeting with new clients. In order to be his client, I think I told you all this before, you have to be worth $50 million. And so, it's trying to explain the value that Goldman offers in what they call their family office for those kinds of people that are high wealth accumulators. And so he never thought about sales and he sort of had to learn it on his own, but we actually do a pretty good job of teaching you about selling. So success in sales is important because a huge portion of our market economy is driven by selling, both consumer sales and business-to-business sales, ultimately so that we can satisfy consumer demand. That's a huge percentage of the value in our economy is in selling. So what does it require for success in sales? Personal integrity and high ethical standards. Going back to ethics and marketing and those early lectures on that, this is critically important. We will see, and I will talk about in a few minutes, the difference between the selling philosophy, that second sort of era in marketing thought, and what we now call the era of relationship selling or value co-creation, and how important that is in terms of ethical standards. Particularly, we find this to be true among your generation and the generation, some of you are probably Generation Z, are really interested in sort of the social entrepreneurship. What is it that companies are doing and how are they projecting those ethical standards? And there are lots of companies now that are founded by people of my generation and younger, your generation, that are recognizing the needs. So one of the first ones to do this was Tom's, the one for one, and that's been followed by other companies like Bombas, who, if you've ever tried Bombas socks, I actually tried some for the first time. A friend of mine bought a pair for me. They are actually really comfortable socks, but they do a one for one because socks are the most requested item in homeless shelters. So that's their social entrepreneurship. So these ethical standards are really important, and people want to know that they are engaging with companies that are environmentally friendly and ethically sensitive. So personality structure, you have to have a positive self-image and perseverance to be really good at sales. And all of the textbooks, yes.
Okay, so I was wondering, with the social part of entrepreneurship, when places will do like 15% goes to this, is that something totally different than like a Tom's one for one thing, or does that?
No, that's the same kind of recognition of your impact on society and your need to give back. It's just that Tom's and Bombas give a greater percentage, right, than 15% or 20%. Milton Friedman, who is one of the sort of founders of neoclassical economic thought, said that businesses have only one obligation, and that is to, within the confines of the law, to maximize shareholder wealth or to maximize owners' equity, right? And that leads to some really interesting results. And what I don't think Friedman recognized in that is that we provide an enormous advantage to businesses in this country, more so than probably any other country on earth, in that we provide limited liability, and that allows for the massive pooling of capital so that people can build, nobody would invest in Ford if your entire life savings could be wiped out when Ford has an accident. Like there's a very famous case called Ford versus Cersei. It actually started out as Cersei versus Ford, and then when Ford appealed, it became Ford versus Cersei. William Cersei was riding in the front seat of his father's Ford F-150 pickup. When he bent forward to pick up something, his dad said, "Pick up that wrapper on the floor." I think he'd thrown like a gum wrapper or something on the floor. And as he was going forward, at that instant, his father slammed into the back of another vehicle. The tension regulator on the seatbelt that he was wearing, because he was applying constant pressure at the time of the impact, it didn't catch. And he ended up slamming into the windshield and became a quadriplegic as a result of that. Through the doctrine of what we call strict products liability, the jury found Ford liable for that. And they appealed this huge verdict. And that appeal, ultimately, Willie Cersei died in the interim because part of the safety net that he was relying on to keep him alive, which was somebody to change and regulate the ventilator, he had to have 24-hour care, failed. His family was not able to continually pay for that during the appeals process, and he died. I tell you the story because it points out that companies, it was a huge, at the time, it was a case out of Texas, it was a huge black mark for Ford that they continued to appeal because they said that they were not going to pay outrageous amounts of money for something that they were clearly liable for. The second aspect of that is that we wouldn't invest in Ford if I wouldn't put any money in Ford if I knew that my house and my car and everything could be taken from some huge judgment against them. Ultimately, if you could go down, so you're limited to the amount of money you invest. That's a huge benefit to corporations, right? And my argument against Milton Friedman's is that because we provide you with this huge benefit, this ability to pool large amounts of capital, that comes with responsibility, right? I mean, you're getting this huge benefit, and that comes with an enormous responsibility as well. And so I think the giving back and social entrepreneurship is a big part of that, in my opinion. So positive self-image, perseverance. The ability to handle rejection is obviously one of the things that's very difficult in sales for a lot of people. The ability to cultivate and maintain personal relationships as we moved into this era of value co-creation is critical. And then intellectual development and empathy, the ability to at least try to understand what the other person is feeling. People want to do business with people that they think understand them or that feel their needs, right? That's important. Now, is that really possible? I talk a lot about this. Can you ever really understand what it is to be anyone other than yourself? I'm not sure that you can, but to the extent possible, you've got to at least try. So the basics of professional sales, and we talk a lot about this in the introductory class, going through all of these. So identifying needs, prospecting, then identifying what customers are really interested in, what benefits and features, recognizing and defining those needs, refining the product that you're going to recommend based on the information that you get, then providing solutions to meet those needs, and then persuading customers to make a decision to use a product, and then following up after the sale with good customer service and ensuring that the customer is satisfied and that you've met their needs so that they will be a return customer, so that they will continue to use your products and services in the future. So there are lots of advantages of a sales career. Independence is one of them. Most of the time and most of the selling that we do, or the type of business-to-business sales that we focus on in our program, require that you go out and meet with customers. And so it's not like an office job in many respects, where somebody's going to stand over you and tell you what to do or monitor what you're doing. You have an enormous amount of autonomy in sales usually. And so that requires a fairly decent work ethic, because you're not going to have day-to-day supervision. My friend Anita, who used to sell for 3M Light Cure when they came out with the Light Cure braces. So when I got my braces years and years and years ago, I think I was 13 when they started on my braces. It took, I don't know, 3 hours to do an entire mouthful of braces, because what the orthodontist had to do was they had to prep your tooth, they had to dry it out, right, so that the bracket would stick. And then they put this glue on there, and then they had to hold the bracket in place for a period of time. And it took a long time. 3M, which is known for adhesives, comes out with this product called Light Cure, and probably some of you who had braces in here probably had Light Cure at any of you, where they put the bracket on and they shine an ultraviolet light on it, and it instantly cures the bracket to the tooth. That was the product that she sold, and her territory was all of Oklahoma, southern Kansas, western Arkansas, and northeastern Texas. And her boss was in New York, I think, at the time. The regional manager that was in charge of her and salespeople, I think, from this point east was in New York. They don't know what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, right? If you're going out and you're meeting with dentists and things like that. And so you have to have a fairly good work ethic. There's a lot of variety and variance in customers' needs out there, and understanding that. So it's an interesting profession to go into, because you're going to deal with lots of different issues and having to come up with lots of different solutions for different types of clients and customers. And so it's not boring. It's generally different all the time. Your opportunities for advancement in sales are incredible, because if you're good at it, you can go into sales management. Interestingly enough, though, a lot of our sales students that we have don't ever want to go into management. Why would that be? Why would they not want to go into Salesforce management?
Would you lose commissions?
You lose commissions, yeah. So generally, managers have a higher base salary. So most of the jobs, the average job that we have in, the companies that we work with on a day-to-day basis and providing placement to our students, and I have more companies than I have students that want, to have access to students. Generally, on average, the base is something like $50,000 a year plus commission. So it's not all commission-based selling. The base is usually higher for sales managers, but the commission structure or the variable compensation portion of their plans generally decreases. So your ability to say, once you go into management, I want to make this amount of money every year, decreases. My sister-in-law, who sells pharmaceutical products now, or she's a missionary salesperson for some pharmaceutical, she used to do medical device sales until she had a kid, and medical device sales because she actually goes into the operating suite with doctors and shows them how to use the device. And that required a lot more travel and a lot more long days. And so when she started having kids, she decided she wanted to step back and just do pharmaceutical sales, because that's generally a more 9-to-5 sort of structure. And usually there's less travel. Your territory is a lot smaller. She's in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so the territory there is considerably less than if you're selling, at one point in time, she was selling oncology devices that go in and take biopsies of breast tissue if somebody has a mass. And so she would actually go in and tell the doctor how to manipulate the machine in order to grab samples of breast tissue. Well, that requires, being in a doctor's office or in a hospital for long periods of time. But she went into pharmaceutical sales, and they have tried to get her to go into management, and she is resisted at every single opportunity because it just limits your ability to make a lot of money. She would rather have the potential to make a substantial amount of money on commissions rather than having that guaranteed sort of base salary and a smaller variable compensation plan. So there are opportunities for advancement. Unfortunately, some people want to do that, but a lot of salespeople, what we find is that they don't actually want to go into Salesforce management. They want to stay as salespeople because they like the independence, they like the variable compensation portion of their plan. So it's a great way to develop entrepreneurship skills. A lot of our students say that they want to own their own business, and sales is definitely a way of developing those types of skills that are necessary if you want to be an entrepreneur and grow a business, because ultimately you have to have customers in order for your business to survive. So it's great for that. Although I think everybody should go into sales, there are disadvantages of a sales career. All of the textbooks will say, they ask this question in all of the textbooks, are salespeople born or are they made? And I will tell you that the answer in every textbook is that salespeople are made. I'm not sure that that's true. I think it's like leadership. I've had this debate. I have written a textbook entitled Managing in the Public Sector, a casebook in ethics and leadership, so I know something about leadership. And I have had this debate with one of my colleagues in the College of Business, and she says that anyone can be a leader. I don't think that's true. I mean, if you are agoraphobic, anybody know what agoraphobic is? People who are horribly, have any of you seen a movie called As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson? No. He's a writer in the movie, and he's agoraphobic. He doesn't ever leave his apartment. He's got a fear of the outside world. If that's you, you don't want to leave your apartment, you have a fear of contact with other people, I'm not sure that we can make you into a great leader. I'm not sure that we can make you into a great salesman. Now, maybe with modern technology and the advent of internet sales and online selling, maybe we could do it, but a big portion of sales is still that human contact. Even in an age of COVID, one of the things that's happened is people, they still want to see that other individual so that they can get the human interaction. And so if you are just completely antisocial, I'm not sure that we can make you a great salesperson. I'm not sure that we can make you a great leader. At the other extreme, there are people who seem to have just a natural gift for it, that it's easier. They like it. They like talking to people. My brother's best friend in high school was a kid named Garrett Vance. Garrett's father is John Vance, who owns John Vance Motors in Guthrie and several other car dealerships. And Garrett is, he is an extreme extrovert. He likes talking to people, and he was constantly selling. And I would have to say to him, because my brother ran around with this little posse of kids, I would have to, Garrett, stop selling. He would stop conning me because he was constantly doing it. He grew up in that business, and he's constantly doing it. So if you are, that type of person, obviously it's easy for us to take those people, refine their skill set, and make them better. What I focus on are what I call the people on the bubble. The people, that's most of us. If we think about sort of, individuals and following along a spectrum, the vast majority of people are probably somewhere in the middle, right? Like a bell curve. And that's what we call the normal distribution, where, they're not totally agoraphobic, but they're maybe not 100% extroverts. They're somewhere in the middle. And those people, I think you can really develop those skill sets, and you see a great improvement in them. When we go to competitions and when I start working with students on a sales team, it's amazing to me. Those students that start out and maybe they're not really all that attracted, they're one of the ones that said, I don't want to go into sales. I want to get a business degree so that I can be assured of a job, but I don't want to do sales. And then they hear me talk about the advantages of a sales career, and they think, well, maybe I should consider it, because I'm probably, even if I'm a finance major, I'm probably going to be selling. My brother, who was an accounting major as an undergraduate and then got a law degree and then went and got an advanced degree from NYU in taxation, didn't think he was going to be selling, and he's now selling. And it's a big portion because he has a variable compensation plan with Goldman, bringing in new clients. Every client he brings in is an automatic $100,000 commission. And he makes far more money off of commissions than he does off of doing wealthy people's taxes and estate plans. Right? And that's just where the money is to be made. So watching those people progress. I have students that are just sort of naturally good at it, and there isn't a lot of movement from the time they start in the program to the time they finish. It's minor adjustments in that skill set. But the ones that didn't really think about sales until they took a principles class and I talked about the advantages of sales, and we see them move from being really afraid to talking and going into their first sales lab and not necessarily, knocking it out of the ballpark, to then going to competitions and getting better and better and better and better, and ultimately getting those great jobs. So, again, are salespeople born or made? I think it's a little bit of both. It's kind of like a nature-nurture debate. So there are people that I don't think need to go into sales. If you are absolutely, petrified of having a variable compensation plan because you need to make this amount of money, maybe sales isn't for you, because the salary can be highly variable. You can do really, really well one year, and think about real estate. If the market is up and people are buying, which they are right now, that's great, but it will turn around at some point in time and people will stop buying houses, right? We go through peaks and troughs in things like the real estate business, and so it can be really great one year and not great the next, and that's a 100% commission type structure, right? Also, you've got enormously irregular hours if you're a salesperson, particularly if you are in the business to consumer sales. When is it that most people can go look at cars, if that's what you're doing, or look at consumer electronics? it's generally not 8 to 5 on Monday through Friday, right? It's after 5 o'clock, it's on weekends, and so you can have really irregular hours. The travel can be a problem for a lot of people, particularly if you are committed to being home every night to tuck your kids into bed. So the travel can be a problem. I know the salespeople that I worked with in the company that I was a vice president in, I loved to travel, and I got to travel some, and we'll talk about that because I'm going to talk about team selling. But they were traveling, our vice presidents traveled probably 4 out of 5 days a week, and 3 weeks out of the month. So, that's a lot of travel, and it does get to be old living out of a suitcase and waking up and not being in your own bed. That can be difficult. And then, of course, handling rejection can be problematic for a lot of people because we don't like to hear no. We take it personally. So we can classify sales jobs in a number of ways, and we'll talk about the type of sales that we generally train for. Trade selling is usually dealing with buyers who are then resellers. This is like if you've ever gone to Dallas Market, you're selling products to people who are going to go and put it in their retail shops and things like that. We also did this. We did trade selling. There are educational conferences. The company that I work for, there are educational conferences, and we would go and set up booths. And we had a huge booth. It was really expensive. I think we paid $150,000 for our big trade show booth, which had a big A+ that rotated and lit up and flashed on the top of it. So we did some of that, some of the trade selling, and we were selling again to the industrial market, which is schools, prisons, nonprofits, homeschooling websites, things like that. Missionary sales, these are people that provide education to people who ultimately decide what product a customer will use. The biggest example of this is pharmaceutical sales, and we have a lot of students that actually want to go into pharmaceutical sales because it's interesting, and you get to talk to interesting people. Doctors are generally interesting people, and so we have a lot of people who do that. But you don't have a direct, one-to-one. You can't tell exactly how much you've sold because it's ultimately dependent upon doctors to write script. Technical sales, these are people with specialized skill sets. For example, in the chemical industry, you'll have a salesperson who will go out, but they'll also have people that are chemists who can explain the way products work. Specialized machines, high-tech industries generally employ these. We did this as well. We would go out with a sales team in the company that I worked for. So we had a salesperson or a vice president of sales, and then we had programmers that would go out and we would talk to the technical people in school districts that were going to be needing to install the product, the learning management system that we had, understanding what their platforms were and what their capabilities were and what kinds of support they were going to need. I would go out as the lawyer and I would, try to figure out ways that we could, along with the school board's lawyer, we could get sole source contracts. So I was part of the sales team. I did the technical aspect of going in and figuring out how you could say, we're going to get you this product, and we want to be a sole source, because government agencies generally have to bid. That's the way it is at UCO. Anything over $5,000, we generally have to go out and competitively bid that, unless we can prove that there's only really one source for the product that we need, and then we can do a sole source bid. New business development, that's another type of sales for firms that are seeking growth. Order taking, this is simply responding to requests. You find a lot of these people, and this is not the type of sales that we generally focus on, in call centers and inbound call centers that take orders. It's a very basic type of sales. And then order getting involves more creative problem solving and understanding what the consumer or the business needs in order to develop their business. So relationship selling. Relationships are the heart of selling today, building relationships, because we recognize now that there's something called customer lifetime value. That it is easier to maintain a customer than it is to go out and prospect for customers. Prospecting is tedious, it's time consuming, and therefore it burns resources, right? And if we can keep customers coming back, that's better than having to go out and constantly look for new customers. So we really focus on relationships in professional sales today. It's a very different model from that selling philosophy that we saw sort of developing after the Industrial Revolution, where we've now got lots of goods and services that are being mass produced, and we've just got to get people out there and try to sell the product, get the money, and move on to the next sale. So online sales are increasing. This is a trend in the job market, obviously, and with COVID, this has really taken off in terms of, you know, holding Zoom meetings and WebEx sales and things like that. Technical and advanced sales positions are growing as we become more technologically sophisticated. The ability to understand technical needs of customers, particularly in the business-to-business context, is a growing aspect in sales. And so we have a lot of students that actually come into the program and they sort of know what industry they want to target, what they want to learn about, and so that they can develop a body of expertise and go out there and sell in those markets. And new selling is about value co-creation. So working with customers so that we're not just pushing out products that are, you know, sort of small, medium, and large, but really understanding how people are going to use the product, what they're going to need the product for, and you know, then what their future needs are going to be as well. So engaging in value co-creation. So this is the traditional model versus the relationship model. And this is where a lot of our, I think, negative or pejorative images of salespeople come about, is from that traditional model of selling. So in the traditional model of sales, you spend very little time on the approaching the prospect. You still see this being used, and I think I told you all one of my favorite activities in the fall, and hopefully they'll have it again this year because they didn't last year, is the state fair. I love to go to the fair for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is I grew up on a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico for part of my life because my parents were divorced, and my father had this cattle ranch in northern New Mexico. So I like to go and I like to see the agricultural exhibits, and I like to see the cattle, the cow shows, and the horse shows, and all of that. But more than that, as a marketer, I love to go to the fair because the fair is an opportunity to see up close and personal what people would rather have than their own money. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating to me what people would rather spend their money on than having it in the bank. And there's all kinds of stuff. So you go into the exhibit halls at the state fair, the Centennial Building, the Cox Pavilion, and now the new Bennett Event Center, which is, you know, got all kinds of stuff in there during the fair. And there are people selling all kinds of products. And they've got this microphone headset like they're Madonna, and they're pitching, you know, Ginsu knives or stainless steel pans that are non-stick, that don't have the non-stick coating, which, by the way, all stainless steel pans, the first few times you use them will be non-stick because they're polished surface. It's once you start getting little abrasions in the polish that they start becoming sticky, and that happens to all of them. So it's, you know, they're trying to get your attention very quickly, pitching their product, telling you about it, and then, you know, closing long and hard. So 40% of the time is spent on closing. Very little of the time is spent on identifying prospects and qualifying them. The vast majority of your time is spent in presenting and then closing. The current model, the value co-creation model or the relationship model, it reverses this pyramid. It's an inverted pyramid where you're going to spend most of your time building trust and establishing rapport with people. And if you do this at the beginning, if you really sit down and figure out what it is that your customer or client needs, you will have less resistance and spend far less time on closing, because you've done the foundation work up front. You're building that relationship, and so you're going to spend 40% of your time on approaching, understanding what that client needs, then presenting. The product is going to only be 20%. Identifying needs, probing, asking questions is going to be 30%. So you can see 70% is spent on these first two steps, and then these second part of the model, the second half of the model, the making the presentation and closing, become a lot easier if you spend that time up front building that relationship, rather than using that top-down, regular pyramid approach. So the relationship cycle, identifying qualified prospects. Every textbook in sales says that the hardest thing for most salespeople is overcoming rejection. And I'm going to tell you that that is, I think, an incorrect statement. I think that overcoming rejection is maybe a very difficult psychological component of sales, but the vast majority of people who go into selling tend to be somewhat extroverted people. They tend to like other people. And prospecting, in my opinion, is actually the hardest part of the process for most salespeople. Why is that? Because it involves research, it is tedious, and it is lonely, right? I mean, my friend, and I've talked about him quite a bit, who works for US Foods, Adam, he spends Sunday evening after his kids go to bed planning, his next week. And it takes, he said, I'll spend 6 to 8 hours on Sunday evening looking at new business development, new restaurants. Restaurants are one of those businesses that come and go very quickly. It's one of the easiest businesses to go broke, is a restaurant. And so they're constantly coming up with new restaurants. In Oklahoma City, whatever is the latest fad may not last 6 months and will be gone. I was reading an article on the 21 chain restaurants that they think are going to go broke in 2021 or shortly thereafter. And some of them would probably surprise you in terms of the ones that they are predicting will go broke. One of the ones that I was really surprised at is they are predicting that, I mean, it was no surprise to me that Applebee's is probably not long for this world. It's also no surprise that Chili's, if you have eaten at Chili's for any length of time, when they first opened up, they were a far more high-end casual dining experience. They were closer to Outback than they were to, fast food. Now they're pretty close to being fast food. They used to have cloth napkins. We're now giving you silverware in a little plastic or paper bag with cloth napkins, and the plates that they're using, it used to be they had, I think when they first opened the Chili's here in Edmond, they were using Fiestaware for their plates. They're now using these trays basically that they put parchment paper in, and they just, easy to throw the parchment paper in, use a sterilizer and turn it fairly quickly. Outback was another one that they're predicting will go. So restaurants come and go, looking at new businesses that are opening, understanding what kind of business they are, finding out who the owner is or the decision maker. That takes a lot of time, and that's lonely work. It's not something that you generally do as a team. And so I actually think that identifying qualified prospects is really one of the hardest things that salespeople do, because most salespeople want to get out there. They want to talk to people, and they like talking to people. But this is absolutely critical, because if you don't have qualified prospects, you're not going to sell. You're not going to be terribly successful. And so identifying those people that need your products and services, what it is that you can do for them, and who is the ultimate decision maker can be really, really tricky. If you're selling to higher education, for example, if you're selling to UCO, who is it that, if you're selling learning management systems like D2L, who is it that can actually make a decision? Well, we have all these people that are important in the decision-making process, not the least of which is probably the vice president of information technology, the chief technology officer. That person has no ability to sign contracts for more than $5,000, right? And she's enormously important. She's obviously an influencer, but there are only 2 people on this campus that can sign contracts for over $5,000. And understanding that buying center and understanding who it is that you have to not only influence, those are the gatekeepers, but ultimately who can sign on the dotted line is hard work. So identifying these prospects becomes really, really critically important. Otherwise, you're engaging in wasted coverage. Then planning your pre-approach activities, finding out, and if you take my class, in my sales class, or one of the other instructors' sales class, identifying what it is, using social styles to figure out, using information that we can find publicly available to kind of try and figure out. And I do a whole prospecting thing in my sales class where I ask them to, imagine that you are selling for Loves. So Loves has a team of salespeople. Most people don't think about this, and they're one of our major sponsors. Loves has a business-to-business segment, right? They're selling fuel and other services, and they have a financial and a financing component to that. So they're selling to independent truckers largely. And so you're trying to get them to purchase fuel, and then they also have something called a factoring program where they buy accounts receivable from truckers so that they get the money up front and they can then pay their bills. And Loves collects, right? And they charge an interest on that, basically. They're giving you the money, and they're going to take a percentage of that. You're getting the money up front. Figuring out what the personality of that person is, using social styles and vowels so that you can understand how to talk to those people. Again, as part of that pre-approach process, and it's lonely and it's difficult to do that, but it's critically important, because if you can figure out who the decision maker is, what their social style is, and maybe what their vowel style is, you can go a long way towards being able to talk to those people in the most effective manner, so that you're not talking past them, you're talking with them. In the second phase, you have the approach, making a good impression, uncovering their needs by asking questions, then presenting your solutions, and then handling objections and gaining commitment and closing. And there are various types of closes that we talk about. Various types of ways of handling objections, depending on the social style of the person that you're talking to. For example, there are 4 social styles, and I'll tell you what my social style is. I'm a driver. What do drivers want? Driver, as the social style implies, they want direct answers to questions. So when you get a driver and they have an objection, you better answer the question pretty quickly, as opposed to someone who's an amiable, who you might be able to say, that's a really good question. If you'll let me get to that in the presentation, I think that will be answered. You can do that with an amiable. With a driver, if you don't answer their question or their objection, they're going to be instantly put off, right? They want an answer. They want a direct answer, not a circuitous answer. They want a direct answer. That's what I am. I want you to answer my question, and I want you to be direct and short and to the point about it. Amiables, you can be less direct. You can say, I think that'll be part of the presentation. If you have somebody who's an expressive, expressives are people who are very theatrical. It's more about feeling with those people than it is about just the facts, right? So service continuous quality improvement is important in this era of value co-creation, in this era of relationship building and sales, rather than just getting the money, moving on to the next sale. That's the AIDA, awareness, interest, desire, action model of the traditional sales approach. And that's what they do at the fair, right? I love it. It's great. You got these people that are talking, they're making a pitch, they're getting your interest, they get your money, and what happens, the fair is 13 days now. It used to be a full month when I was a kid growing up. They've shortened the time of the fair, and then it was 2 weeks, and now it's basically 2 weekends and a few extra days, like a Wednesday and Thursday, through one weekend, and then the following weekend, and it shuts on Sunday. What are those people going to do? They generally start, they are on a fair circuit. So fairs start earlier in the north because that's when you bring harvest in historically. The further north you go, the shorter the growing season. And so, like the Iowa Fair is really, really early. I think it's in the end of August or early part of September. And you go through the fair season and you get to, like, for example, the Louisiana State Fair, which is actually in Shreveport, not in New Orleans or Baton Rouge. And that one doesn't occur until almost November. The Dallas State Fair, the Texas State Fair, which the biggest one in Texas is in Dallas. That's always during OU Texas weekend, right? They play OU Texas at the Cotton Bowl at the Dallas State Fair. And that one is always in October, right? So you start up north and you move, and every 10 to 15 days, you're moving on to the next fair, right? You're going to the next place. That's not what we focus on mostly in the type of selling that we do. So we're managing customer relationships, recognizing this customer lifetime value. And the example I give is actually from a business to consumer one. Sewell Cadillac, Mr. Sewell wrote a book, and he actually does a training program in his dealership. And there are people that will drive from Oklahoma to Dallas to buy Sewell Cadillacs. And he calls it the $332,000 customer. At the time he developed the book, that was the average amount of money that a customer would spend. That was their lifetime value if they were buying Cadillacs. That's actually a very low figure now because the average Cadillac is far, far greater. If you buy a Cadillac Escalade, what does a Cadillac Escalade start at?
Over 100,000.
They're 100, yeah, it's about $100,000, right? I think you can get like the totally base model for right at 100, but they're over $100,000. So that's low. But at the time, that was the customer lifetime value. But he said, if you take into account, if they have a good experience, what they will generate in terms of word of mouth, one, and what you want is positive word of mouth, was they're worth $1.5 million. Sewell doesn't advertise, Sewell Cadillac does not advertise in the Oklahoma City market. But you will find, if you go out in the parking lot, I'm driving my mother's car today, she's got a Sewell Cadillac because people like the experience so much of buying from Sewell that they will drive from Oklahoma to Texas to buy Sewell Cadillacs. So the actual value is 1.5 million. And there are lots of people who are what we call marketing mavens. They like to talk about their purchases and where they got them and the deal that they got. If you can get those people, if you can identify them, they're worth a lot of money to you in developing those relationships. Team selling. Historically, selling has been one salesperson. Why is the light going out? Let me see if I turn this off a bit easier. Historically, selling was one person, but as we've become more technical, it's important that you have people with technical expertise on the sales team. As I indicated, with regard to learning management systems, we had to send out our VP of product development, because that's the people who did the coding, and they could explain what was going to be necessary for the install. At the time, and a lot of the product that we sold, because we were selling to lots of school districts that maybe didn't have internet, we were going to have to actually do an install on a local area network or on individual schools or a wide area network. We weren't able to just download it via the internet. So we would have, this VP who could go out and talk to the chief technology officers in these various school districts and tell them, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to install it. This is the kind of technical expertise that you're going to need to maintain the system. I also owned a company at one point in time that did nurse recruitment in permanent placement for hospitals in the South and Southwest. So under the North American Free Trade Agreement, you could get nurses to come across from the Canadian border fairly easily to American hospitals. There's a shortage of nurses in the United States because we have a number of factors that are increasing. So we've got an aging population. As the population gets older, they require far more healthcare services than young people do, right? So we've got a graying population. We've got a retiring number of the baby boomers are retiring or have retired. So you've got these nurses that are leaving the profession because they're retiring, they're getting to retirement age. And you've got, this aging population that's now demanding more services. So I was a partner in this company. We recognize that there's a need for nurses. It's hard to get them. You're basically cannibalizing nurses in the United States if you're just recruiting from hospital. And nurses do jump around, by the way, because they'll get a sign-on bonus, they'll stay as long as they have to not have to pay that sign-on bonus back, and then they move to the next hospital, right? And there's some that do this. So because Canada is part of what we call the British Commonwealth, nurses from Jamaica, where they don't pay very well, would go to Canada. They can get Canadian citizenship in a year, and guess what? They hate Canada because Canada is the antithesis of Jamaica in terms of its climate. It's cold, it's dark for large portions of the year, and they came from Jamaica. So they all want to come to the United States. We recognize this, that they wanted to come to the United States. We could get Jamaican nurses to come across the border on the North American Free Trade on H-1B visas very quickly. So the company that I had with my partners, we actually we contracted with an immigration attorney to help them understand what the immigration requirements were. And then we would also contract with nurse recruiters that would go up and they could explain, because they understood what the job was, and they would go to the hospitals with us and see what kind of working conditions there were. And they could then talk to these people about what kind of conditions at the various hospitals that we represented were going to be, what the needs were. Nursing is a lot like other professions now. It used to be, if you went back to the 1940s or 50s, a nurse was a nurse. And, they might work all floors of the hospital. That's no longer true. If you go into oncology, for example, you have to have a specialization to work in the medical oncology floor at OU. It's not just any nurse can do it, because they have to understand what the drugs are and the interactions and the indications that can go along with that. And so these hospitals have various needs, and it was about matching the nurse with where they wanted to be. They wanted I had no hospitals in Minnesota that contracted with me, because I was not going to be very successful in getting Jamaican nurses to go to Minnesota. If they're going to stay in something that's cold, they're going to stay in Canada, right? They all wanted to go to Florida or Louisiana or Mississippi or Alabama, southern states. I had one hospital that was in southern New Mexico, and although that wasn't ideal, they would go there because they paid a lot of money, right? And they had a sizable sign-on bonus, and at least the temperature was a lot warmer in southern New Mexico than it is in Canada. So we'd have these nurse recruiters that would go with us, and they could tell them about the various hospitals that we had, what kinds of needs they had, what kinds of nurses they were looking for, and they could speak sort of the language that I was not able to talk about, because I'm not a nurse. I don't know, I mean, I have some idea of owning a business, what it's like, but I'm not that technically sophisticated. So we would have a nurse recruiter that would also go with us. So team selling is becoming more and more prevalent. Multiculturalism is becoming more and more prevalent. In spite of the fact that the Trump administration said, and Kevin McCarthy and Trump's Secretary of State said, we are not a multicultural nation. That's just an a priori wrong statement. We are becoming increasingly ethnically diverse. Texas will go minority, majority before 2045. Right? And that's not very long till the majority in Texas will not be, Anglos. It will be other people, right? So multiculturalism is increasing. It's increasing our interdependence. No nation produces everything that they need anymore. We certainly don't. We have to rely on other countries. The largest producer of vaccines, for example, in the world is which country? Not the United States. We develop them here. Where are they actually produced in many instances? Who's the largest producer of vaccines? Anybody know? They talk about this a lot on the news because it's a problem. Because they have a high rate of COVID, they're having huge problems, and yet they're the largest producers of vaccines in the world.
Isn't it China?
It's not China, but it's close. Take another guess. What's another country that is a big producer of stuff?
I want to say Japan, but that's probably
No.
not right either. What is it?
It's India.
Mm.
So, we don't manufacture we develop a lot of the drugs here, we don't manufacture them. So we're increasing our interdependence on other nations. And obviously diversity is becoming a huge factor in most businesses. And understanding that kind of diversity and having the sensitivity is becoming more and more critically important. Understanding that it's not just one size fits all. When we go back to that relationship selling model, historically, if you went back to like the 1940s and 50s, this small, medium, and large sort of worked, right? I mean, people were basically we were sort of a homogenous or a more homogenous society than we are today. We've now got an enormous amount of diversity, and those sorts of small, medium, and large don't necessarily work for everybody. So we've got lots of companies now that are doing custom, tailor-made products, right? Measuring you, basically taking a picture, using their app, and selling you shirts based on very specific measurements. That's value co-creation, mass customization of products and services. And that is it. I am done for the semester. Congratulations. You've made it through Principles of Marketing. Hopefully you'll consider a marketing degree or professional selling, major or minor. I've enjoyed having you all this semester. So I hope that you have a wonderful summer break. If you're coming back for summer classes, that's productive. I will have the final exam finished. There's one that's up there. I've got to modify it, so don't start taking it yet. By Monday, I will send out an email when it is up and posted. There is one that's out there that's from last semester. Obviously, I have to go through and take out the stuff that I didn't cover or add stuff that I did cover in more detail this semester. So don't take it yet. Otherwise, I'll just have to clear out your score and you'll be taking an exam. So, okay. Enjoy your weekend. Yeah.
When will that be official?
Monday, at least by Monday. I'm hoping to get it up before then.
Not posted, but due.
You'll have until the end of finals week.
Okay.
So finals ends on Friday.
Okay.
So you'll have at least Monday through Friday to take it.
Is this one gonna have an essay on it?
I have not decided yet. I am leaning towards not having an essay because of the amount of time that we have. We have a very quick turnaround. Grades are due Tuesday at noon, I think. So I'm leaning towards not having an essay, but I'm not guaranteeing that. I may get energetic, but probably not. So in which case it'll just be a multiple guess exam. All right, thanks. You all enjoy your break.